Okay, welcome everybody on another meetup. At first I want to apologize because we have small technical issue. We mixed up some hours of the meetup. So on the meetup.com the hour is 7 p.m. and or should be 6 p.m. and we have a lot of attendance here on site, but we probably will have more in a couple of minutes. So we decided to improvise and start with the Q&A session. We have a spontaneously panel of Angular developers sitting behind me, and we can start with some questions that you can ask to them. And then we can take it from there and see what will happen from that discussion. It's totally spontaneously, so let's see how it goes. And afterwards, at 7 p.m., we'll start the presentation from Fanis, our guest from Greece, a Google developer expert, and also Mateusz, upcoming Google developer expert. You never know, but also a team leader and senior developer in House of Angular. So yeah, I mean, let's start the Q&A session, and hopefully you will have some questions to the guys, and that will start some kind of discussion. And let's see how it will end afterwards. Okay, so I also present other people on the panel. So on the left there's Fanis, there's Mateusz from House of Angular, Przemek, another senior developer, Krzysztof, another senior developer, and Mateusz on the most right. Yeah, so let's begin. I'm turning microphone for you guys.
You can bring also microphone for us.
Yeah, hopefully, but you need to repeat the question from the...
There is no other way. So, because I'm thinking how we can start, so maybe if you're already there with us, so you probably were somehow interested in the presentations we're gonna present. So maybe the question is whether you have some questions up front regarding the presentation on that topic we're gonna present today. Is there something what comes to your mind? No, nothing special, yeah?
So another option would be to have something more broad questions, more broad Angular questions. So I remember we had this kind of panel in Athens, capital of Greece, and it was a good one. But at first, when you ask the audience to ask you questions, the audience is like, what kind of questions? But we all have problems. So what kind of problem did you have to solve today? What kind of problem did you have to solve yesterday? Some random topic that you can choose apart from, like Mateusz said, the topics of today. You can think some day-to-day issues that you have to solve. Either this has to do with content projection, either this has to do with NG templates, or HTTPs, interceptors, or whatever, perhaps, or pipes, things like that. So pick whatever you think, and we will try. We will do our best, at least we'll have.
We'll try.
Yeah, we will try.
I have a question. There is no feature in Angular like inject function to use it instead of constructor. And we had recently problem that we like to test features outside testbed, not to use testbed. And when we use this function inject, there starts problem with dependency injections. So can you explain more, or can you say your opinion about this inject function and downside with using this approach?
Yeah, very good question. So let me first try to repeat so all the other can listen to this one and if I correctly understand. So you're using the inject function, and the problem is that in that inject function, despite that it works fine, you have problems with testing?
Yes.
Okay, so testing is problematic in this one, and the reason is that you have to have the environment injector.
Yes.
And as far as I know, in the latest versions of Angular, the test bed exposes a function that exposes also the environment injector. So you have to wrap it. And I think that this is something like testbed run in context. So if you use this one, this kind of method, it should work. I don't remember, it works. Okay.
Yes, but in this problem, this only way to test it. Are there other ways?
No, this is the only way to test it. As far as I know, I'm not sure if guys you have.
This is the right way.
Yeah, this is the way that you have to go.
And because testing in testbed is more expensive than testing outside testbed, so test runs slower. So would you use this inject function or rather stay with old approach and put everything in constructor?
No, I would use the inject method. It's a good one. Why are you saying that is more expensive? It's a very good point.
Okay, because in this inject function is usually useful when there's abstract class or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for me this use case for this inject function. When we have component, I would rather use constructor. And when you test logic in component, it is not necessary to run it in testbed because every time testbed starts, you have to it render template, other stuff. And usually I want to test only a piece of code, piece of TypeScript code, and I don't need all the stuff connected with testbed.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I think this requires some extra. If you're going to make it not that expensive, I think that you need to spend more time on configuring testbed.
Configuring and running testbed.
Yeah.
So this is up and down. So this approach.
Yeah. I think now this brings us to the question: do I have to test my code? And yes, sometimes I would prefer to have slower execution, but not tested code. Again, you have to balance it.
Or not use inject function and you don't need it. Because also you use approach that you use only inject function and don't use constructor. So you put everything.
I think that I lose something here in the context in terms of the injector, in the inject and the test bed. So I do not see any
So,
relation about in this.
As far as I understand, you don't use testbed. You don't use it, yeah?
I use it to test what I need to test in testbed.
Yeah.
Okay, but then you test outside of the testbed, yeah? So you
Yes.
write some, I don't know, just tests without the initializing the testbed, component modules, and so on, yeah?
And to find the dependencies.
So you're just initializing your component with the new syntax, and you have to provide something in the constructor, as far as I understand.
But I can find it.
Yeah, so even though you create the mocks, so as you said, so from your perspective, what I guess you probably measured, so running the testbed is slower than don't run it, because mocks we have to have in both cases, yeah? We mock in the testbed, you mock in your constructor, so the case is only the testbed right now.
Yes.
Okay,
And approach to use inject function instead of constructor all the time.
yeah. So
Yeah, I do not see the problem.
I don't know whether you can somehow override the inject, you know. I don't know whether there is such a possibility, yeah, but it will be like the single case, but don't see the possibility to, you will need to somehow globally overwrite it when you create the new component using the new syntax. It will somehow use your inject.
So, you know what?
But I'm going to that you prefer approach. By the way, this testing that you when you write new component you use only inject function or you stay with old approach and use constructor.
Yeah, and I now understand what you mean, but at the same time I'm thinking the following, that you have a framework that is support the dependency injection, and you try to test this without the dependency injection using your own way, which means that if I have to balance this, yeah, it is faster, I agree with you in this case, but at the same time, doesn't this require more code and more attention and maintainability in terms of now one of the classes has one more argument in the constructor, so I have to revisit all of my tests and do this manually. Whereas on the other side, I have the dependency injection which does this for me. And what is the problem with this? Yeah, it is slower, but it is a guy that is helping us. So to be honest with you, I would go with the testbed in this case.
Yeah, and also from perspective of introducing the new people, you have to explain them. Like This way we are testing components, this way we are testing components logic, and so on. Yeah, so there is like more internal stuff to understand, which is, I would say, not such a common, and how you can also go through it, I think, is like create these functions, logical functions, as pure functions in, I don't know, separating scope of the, a separate file in scope of the component directory, yeah, and this way you don't have to bother with the inject, you just test the pure functions and that's it. I don't know, guys.
Can I have a mic?
Yeah.
Because I got a question for you. And do you use the special inject method for testing?
For testing, you mean in test bed that you to inject something? Or
No, in the test, because
inject
yes, you have this inject method for using in the constructor, right? And another inject method for using in the spec files.
No, we stayed before the approach and still using constructor.
Okay, yeah. Because as I understand, you want to mock or fake some internal dependencies of the classes, right?
We tried, and it is idea to do this because I didn't know how is it possible. I don't know.
Yeah, because Angular gives you this special inject method. The name is the same, but it came from the different namespace because the original method for the inject comes from the Angular/core library, and the inject for testing comes from the Angular/core/testing. And then in this method, you can just override the injected dependencies inside the classes, so you can use mocks instead of like real dependencies or fakes to test the behavior, right?
But it is working in testbed. Outside testbed, it is not possible,
Okay.
as far as I know.
Okay. I haven't used the inject method yet, to be honest. But yeah, in the documentation, I don't see that we need to use testbed. But if you're right,
They assume that everyone is rather testing
go
his
with
component.
the
yeah,
testbed,
because
yeah.
okay, yeah.
It's a good question though. It's very to the point, meaning that you try to do something and at the same time you're trying to compare the response, the execution time of one test and the execution time of another test, and you're like, okay, I want to go with the faster one, but the faster one has some problems, some issues. Yeah, it's a good one. I would go with the testbed, to be honest with you. But very good question.
It depends. I think it depends what kind of classes you want to test, because not always inject function give you the benefit. For example, if you use classes that are injected inside the components and you want to test that, it doesn't matter what you use, inject or the constructor parameters, right? The problem will be with new guards, because you cannot use constructor in new guard in the function. You need to use the inject function, right? So then you need to run the testbed. But for just classes that using needs some kind of external dependencies, I think it's okay to maybe choose the better solution. So either using the inject function or constructor parameters, because yeah, when you want to test just a single class, of course it's much easier in tests to mock or use the fakes and pass it to the constructor. It's easy and try to test, right? Because sometimes you'll need to override some kind of functions that gives you some kind of sample data for your tests, or either check if the method was fired. Maybe that's the case of the test. So in my opinion, you should use the right solution, maybe not only go by using inject function everywhere. Maybe that's better for you.
We can ask for a new question.
Yeah, we will ask for sure for the new question, but also the question, how huge is the benefit of splitting the testing between testbed and not testbed?
How huge?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have not measured that I running every test 10 times and seeing, but generally, when you, as far as I understand, when you use testbed, you render all template, or HTML, everything.
Okay, but let's say, did you measure it in scope of one component even, that it's faster?
I have no data. I simply see that, for example, when you are running test, that they're starting huge components with testbed, and this is running slower, visibly.
Yeah. Okay, so what you will have to compare, even though if you are writing the test, so as you said, when you want to test something in HTML, you have to use testbed even though. So you initialize this testbed. And what can, I don't know, in fact, the initialization of the testbed, it might be like how huge it is, how huge is the module role, how huge of dependencies you need to mock, and probably this will not narrow down due to splitting the test between testing the logic and testing the HTML style stuff between two files. So first you should check whether running twice tests for same component, but with the different, I don't know, setup will not make some bigger effort than just running everything in the testbed. Because as far as I understand, you would like to test your HTML and so on, or you are not testing it at all, and you are testing only some methods from component and nothing more.
Okay, before every test, component should be testbed is running before each, not before all. So every time I run very simple test that I'm checking is something null or undefined, testbed also should also runs. And when I do not initialize in testbed, I only initialize logic and I don't need this HTML. I don't understand. Component is created every time I run test before each, in every loop.
Yeah, this is true, but also I think what Matt meant is like usually this is what you want. I mean, to test both the template and the component as a whole. This is usually when you are testing the component, this should be your unit. If you are just testing the logic from the component without testing the template, without even accessing it, probably there is something wrong with the design. Because if this is a kind of a shared logic, maybe it should be stored in a service or in a pure function, as was also already mentioned. And if you really like to have some logic in the component, usually you should test it through the template, not like directly calling the methods and so on. So that is also one more thing to consider. So this way you can like split your test in like these two categories. Like you can always test the components with the testbed, because anyway you need it to test the template, and then this logic. If you feel you need like to test it separately, probably it should go somewhere else, not to be in the component.
Just to add, maybe a good rule of thumb is that you treat your component class as something that is private in terms of testing, and you test the component as you would think of it as what would user or consumer of this component would do with that component. And then let the component internal logic work against your test case.
Okay, so probably that's it from that topic. Pretty huge. So thank you for your question. I don't know whether there are some other questions. Okay.
Standalone components. Have you tried using them, and do you like them? Are there any disadvantages? Should one migrate to standalone?
So maybe to let everyone say, I would say for myself that we are actively using them in our project, and I like it. I like them, and I will continue using them. So that's it.
The only problem with a problem, if we can say it like that, yes, standalone components, we cannot still yet have completely full standalone application. Meaning that we have the option to bootstrap a component instead of bootstrap the module, but we do not yet have the option to provide the compiler option for Zone.js. This is the only thing that we cannot do currently. But this is coming very soon. But yeah, standalone components, for sure. Standalone everything actually, pipe or whatever. I'm fully into that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what we cannot do with standalone components yet is, for example, going zoneless. It's not possible, right? Still, and yeah, you have to learn the difference between the providers, because you cannot provide everything inside the standalone components. So that's the downside, but overall, for most cases, they can be used like standard components, and the amount of code is smaller, and like having the dependencies inside the component gives you more flexibility, gives you more attention to what you inject inside the components. So I think that's the big benefit of that.
Yeah. Mateusz, you want to say something? You have microphone on yours. Okay, so I can also say that before the standard components, we already were close to this behavior. We have been creating something like SCAM. It was single component as module, something like that. So next to the component, we already have been creating the dedicated modules, and in scope of that modules, we had all the dependencies that component was using, and we have been only declaring and exporting that component, or maybe some subclasses related to that component. Yeah, so that was pretty close to what the standalone currently is. I don't know whether you have some more specific question regarding that one.
So I'm interested in what you said about having dependencies more explicitly listed near the component. Can you talk more about that? What do you mean exactly, and how is it better?
Okay, so not sure what Przemek meant, so he can add more. But for example, one of the big benefits, I would say, of that is like you exactly know what kind of dependencies is this component using. If we are talking about the SCAM approach we've been using, like even before that, maybe it's not a huge difference, because anyway it's like pretty close, let's say, in the same file, the module was in the same file and all of the dependencies were listed there. But if you were using like, I don't know, some shared modules or whatever, like with tens of components maybe, then it's not so obvious, and all of the dependencies then go to this shared module or whatever you call it. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is also before because right now it's not only like we are creating the standalone components, also all of the Angular stuff which is already there, provided by the core of the framework, is also standalone. So there is no longer need, for example, to import the whole Angular like common module into your component, but for example, you are using only a single ng if in the template. So you can explicitly import only this one. So this also reduces your bundle size at the very end, and in general, this like management of the dependencies is more like fine-grained. Yeah.
I can add something to that, because for me, what is relieving when you have one component and all the imports related to this one component, not the module, then when you probably see the legacy code, maybe someone added some kind of pipes, imported them into the module, and this module is used by multiple components. It's not so obvious if you can remove this pipe, because then you have to check if this pipe was used in the different components, or just test if everything still works. But if it's related to this one single component, it's much easier to remove unused dependencies for that component, which for me is like a huge benefit. It's easier just to code.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so maybe regarding the providers, because there is also the difference right now, because as Spanish meant, we have like injector, which is environment injector, and it behaves a little bit different. So if you move to the standalone routers and so on, here might be quite a few surprises. Also, in terms of the injectors, it's like we had the modules, we could have the single ton based on the module level, and then each component which belongs to this module had exactly same provider. Yeah, so same instance. Right now, it's if we provide at the components level, we always have the new instance per component, so we'll need to find some point, probably at the routing level, to just create a single instance of the service for all of the childs across that path in the router. Yeah? So we switch from the thinking at the modules, and we will like think about the paths in the router, or somehow, I don't know yet how, because we are not using this one yet, probably.
In some places.
So a good point with the standalone components is that I'm not sure if you have ever faced the situation where you have a spaghetti code and you have module A, module B, module C, and you have the shared module, of course, the core module, and then you have a component that you're going to use this component in more than one places. And you want to declare this component, and you have already declared this in another module that is already imported. And then we see the compilation error, which says that you cannot declare it because this is already declared. And what's the solution to this? Okay, I will import the shared module. I will move this there, and I will import the shared module, which is, of course, not a good practice. And by having standalone components, immediately we no longer have this kind of issues, because we do not have to redeclare the same thing, we just import it. This is a very good approach as well.
Okay, so we are probably right now on time, because it's 2 minutes left. So,
yeah, so I think we need short technical break just to prepare ourselves for the speeches. So we need 1 minute technical break, and then or maybe 2, and then we start. I mean, I would like to thank you, the guys, for that spontaneously discussion panel. Probably they share some knowledge that they have. Hopefully for you, it's something that could be nice. I could say that we have this kind of discussions every day when the guys are in the office during the coffee break. It looks like one big panel like that every day. Especially today, because a lot of people working remotely in our office came to the office to be here, on the meetup, and are sitting there behind the camera. So yeah, that is how it looks. Maybe one day we'll make a stream from that, but probably nobody will accept it because we share much. Yeah, stream from the kitchen, because we share sometimes some fails as well, and some issues that cannot be shared because of the agreements and all the boring stuff in the project that you cannot share publicly. Okay, let's have a break, 2 minutes, and we will continue with the final speech. Yeah. Okay. Nie będą Okay, yeah. Hello, after a short break. I will maybe start from the very beginning. Welcome everybody on the 8 Angular, House of Angular meetup. I would like to thank Dariusz Kalbalczyk from NG Poland that is helping us with the streaming and organization of that event. But most I would like to welcome our friend Fanis from Greece. He flew here especially for that meetup and to meet with us, and then we had a lot of discussions and doing office time and so on. He's a Google developer expert, but probably he can tell about himself more in his presentation. Probably, maybe some of you already know him from his online activities. So Fanis, welcome, and I give you a microphone and
thank you very
all
much.
the best.
Thank you. So, hello again. So let me introduce myself. So my name is Fanis Prodromou. You can find me in social media as Profanis. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular. I'm a senior Angular developer and I work in the company ASI. And I am also author of the book Mastering Angular Reactive Forms. And if you want to connect with me in the social media, you can find me in Mastodon. I'm not active there. I had to create the account because everyone was creating an account. I was like, okay, I will create an account to Mastodon as well. But anyways, Prodromou have my Twitter and also my blog, blog.profanis.me. I'm not that active in my blog as well, and I'm going to explain why. And you can also find a recent article that I wrote in Angular Love about state management and NGXS, and my LinkedIn, which is Prodromou F. If you're going to buy my book, this is how it looks like, Mastering Angular Reactive Forms, and you can find it in Amazon. And the reason that I'm not that active in my blog is that I spend most of my time in creating videos. So here it says that it's something like 2.7 subscribers, 2.7K subscribers. It's an old screenshot. Now it's something like 4.3, something like that. And I have a lot of free content there, and I highly encourage you to go there, click subscribe and the ring bell. And let's see. So today's topic is about libraries. A library in a monorepo and in a polyrepo. And this is the agenda that we are going to follow. The agenda is like, what is a library? And we will start with the theory. I know that you don't like that much all of the theory, so I'm not going to spend that much time there. And then we will start with a live coding. So, you know, live coding, in most of the cases, we'll have some issues, technical issues. We're all technicals, and we will see how to solve them. And we will do the following, that we're going to create a library, and we will try to create this to use this library in a monorepo and in a polyrepo. So what is a library? So let's start by saying the following, like, if you ask a librarian, they will start saying about how they organize the books. And they organize the books per context, author, topic, and many more options. And similarly, as developers, we like to organize our code per context. Some context could be data and UI. If we follow the mental model of Norwell and X, I think it's 80-20, this kind of ratio, which means that from our product, 80% of the code lives in the libraries, whereas the 20% of the code is the application itself. This means that the application ending up being like just a container, and all of the other code lives in the libraries. And the libraries in general helps us a lot, having also a separation of concerns. So let's see this screen and think the following. We have a designer, and the designer gives us this one, which has on top just a menu item with home, product, users, and then we have the navigation, the avatar icon, and we have a list. Can we think a bit what kind of libraries can we create for this one? One could say, yes, of course we can create a data library. Yes, this would be very correct. On the other side, we won't create a data library for this talk, we will create a UI library. And specifically, we're going to create a UI library based on material, and we will create a product card. So here we have a list of 4, let's say, products, 4 things, and we're going to reuse them. The steps that we're going to follow is to create an Angular workspace, just the workspace, and then we will create a library, and last but not least, we will create the application. And this is how it should look like. We're going to have the workspace, and inside the workspace, we will have the library and the application. The command to create the workspace is, like we see here, npm init angular. What's the name of the workspace? I named it Profanis app, and then we will provide the option no create application. And then we have to create, in this workspace, we have to create the library. And what is the command for the library? Generate library. What is the name? Profanis lib. And okay, now it's the time to create the application. Are we going to go in a monorepo or in a polyrepo? We will start with a monorepo. And a few words about the monorepo. It's a term which says that all of our code lives in a single repository, in only one repository, one GitLab, one GitHub, you name it. Which means that in the same repository I can have more than one applications and more than one libraries. One of the benefits of using a monorepo is that you don't have to deal with the dependencies. Every application has the same dependencies. And since we're going to use a monorepo, the command is the following: generate application. What is the name of the application? Profanis lib app. So let's now start with the live coding. And let's hope for the better, not to have any surprises into the live coding. So let's start with the following. In the beginning, we said that we need first to create a workspace. And the workspace will be npm init angular, and I want to provide the name, and the name will be Profanis app, and then I have to provide also this option, no create application. I think this is correct, and let's give it a try. Yes, proceed with this one. Let's wait a bit to install all the packages. Ideally, if this would be a video, we would have here something like elevator music, but it's not a video, so we don't have this kind of music. Okay, so since we have this, let's go inside this Profanis app, and from now on we will start using our VS Code. So let me close this a bit, and let's focus here. As you can see, we just created a workspace, no application, no library. And if I open the AngularJSON, all that we can see is that we have only few things in terms of configuration, and the project is empty. So let's now create our library. So let me have it like that. And the command is generate. What are you going to generate? A library. And the name is going to be Profanis lib. Immediately, as you can see here, we have the project type. What kind of type is this? This is a library, and then we have a bunch of options. So let me close this a bit. And a very good observation is what happened with this command. Apart from the files that have been created, we also have an update into the AngularJSON, into the package.json, and in tsconfig.json. So let's go there and see what happened. At the time that we created our library, automatically created these paths, and we have this path alias, which points directly to this directory. This means that in order to use the library, we have first to build our library in order to have under this directory. So this is the very first command, and then let's create the application. Generate application, and I will name it Profanis lib app. Routing, I don't need routing. SCSS, just personal preference. And let's again go into the AngularJSON, and as you can see now we have here the Profanis lib app, and this is a type of application instead of a library. And you know what? Let's create one more, Profanis lib app 2. Not a fancy name, but it will do. It will work for now. And again, we have the Profanis lib app 2, which is a type of application. Nice. So if we focus now here into the projects, we can see that we have the Profanis lib, we have the Profanis lib app, and the Profanis lib app 2. And what is the goal? The goal is to use the library, and think now that we are in a monorepo. We need now to use this library into the app or app 2. So let's give it a try. And if you remember, here into the tsconfig.json, we have this path alias, Profanis lib, and this is what we're going to follow. But to make this work, we have first to build the library. So ng-build, what are you going to build? The profanity lib, and I will also provide the watch option so that the file watcher, a tip for the talks, mute your phone. So let me mute it. So now I provided the option watch so that the file watcher will recompile my library whenever I have any change. So let's now open the profanity lib and see what we have. The only thing, this is the default ones. I have just a module, and then I have this component. And the component, it only has this lib profanity lib, which is my selector, and the inline template. No more than that. Okay, so let's now go and try to use this. And I will go into the profanity lib app, src app module, and I will go into the imports, and I want to import my profanity lib module. Again, profanity lib module, and as you can see, I'm using the alias. Okay, so I have this, and now let's go into the app component HTML. I will delete everything, and just to have a distinction between the applications, because we have two applications, I will have here just an app header, and I will use just my selector, lib profanity lib. And now let's do the exact same thing into the other application. Profanity lib app2, and again src app module, and into the imports I will go and be like, I want to have my profanity lib module, and again into the app component HTML I will delete everything, and I will use this selector, lib profanity lib. This should work for now. So here we have the terminal which has the watcher, and let me create two more terminals here, and on the left side I will have the application 1, and on the right side I will have the application 2. So I want to have ng-serve, and I have to provide here the project, should be profanity lib app, and I want this to be into the port, this is the default one, and let's do the same here, ng-serve, which project, the profanity lib app2, and again I want to provide the port, and this is going to be 4001. While waiting for this, let's now open two browsers, one on the left and one on the right, and again on the left we will have the application 1, and on the right we will have the application 2. So this is it. And I forgot to have here up2. Let me do this just for my OCDs. So here I need to have this, and this is going to be my up2. Okay. So now what we have is that up2. Okay. You got the point. So what we managed to do now is that we have the library, and this is being used by two different applications. And this is the very first goal, but in the beginning we said that we need also to have here Angular material. So let's do this as a next step. So let me kill everything from here, kill this as well, and let me close everything as well from my tabs. And the goal is to have into the library the Angular material. And since we need this, of course, we need also to install the packages. So let me install the Angular material and the Angular CDK. While waiting for the installation, let's go now into the profanity lib, and we'll have to do some changes into the profanity lib component. And the changes is going to be, you know what, I don't remember it from heart, that's why I have all of this code here. So what this is doing is that I have just the same selector, lib profanity lib, and then I'm using the material card. This is no more like a copy-paste from the official documentation from material, and I provided just an interpolation for the title. For the subtitle, I have just a currency and a content projection. No more than that. It's more or less copy-paste. And of course, since we have now this kind of errors, this means that we have to go here and import my smart card module. So let's do this. I'm going to have my smart card module, and also I need to have my currency pipe. And speaking of standalones, this is one benefit. Now I have to directly import the currency pipe as a standalone. And now if we go here, we do not we do not see any problem, any errors. So let's now give it a try. So let me scroll down a bit to see what we have. We have the styles. And then this kind of component exposes also to inputs. This is the API of this component. And I have to provide the title and the subtitle. And you know what? Let me build now this library again, ngBuild with a watcher. And let's switch now and go to the application. I will go to the Profiles lib app, into the app component HTML, and I have now to use this component. And again, code fragments, and I have to use, not this one, this one. So what I'm doing is that I'm using the lib profiles lib, and I'm providing a title and a subtitle, and I know that you already hate me because I have here inline style. This is just for the presentation. And I will do the same thing, you know what, let me have here app one, into the other application. So let's go into the app2 source app component HTML and paste it here as well. And now let's rerun to see what we have managed to do. Okay, compile successfully both of them, and if I reload, as you can see now, what we have into the browsers, we have the card, which is based on Material, but we do not have any theme. But how come? We just installed Material, but then we installed Material, but we didn't reference the material into the application. So let's do this as well. So let's go and perhaps here, I want to add 2 points here. We have 2 options actually how to reference the material, manually or by using the ng-add schematic. I would prefer to go with ng-add schematic. So I will add here my Angular /material, and I have also to provide a project. And I want this to be referenced into the Profiles lib app. And let's see. We have to pick a theme. Let's go with a default one. Yes, I need to have the typography, include enable animations. Let's wait a bit and let's see if everything are okay here. It seems that everything are okay. And if I reload, okay, so let's kill them and rerun them. Okay, compile successfully both of them. And now, as we can see, on the left side, which is the application one, it has the material theme, whereas the other one doesn't, which is okay because this is what we did. So at that point, we managed to create a library and use that library into the same repo, in the same repository, which is fairly easy. And if you can think of how easy it is, it's like that we have an application and we have another application, and it's more or less on the same level. And then I have to go up 1 step and just use the same library. Something like that. But how about if we want to do the same thing in a polyrepo? How can we achieve that? And when we say polyrepo, we mean that we have 2 different repositories. GitHub A, GitHub B, GitLab, Azure, whatever, 2 different things. And how about if we want to use the exact same library exposed to them? Currently, we have this kind of setup. On the left side, we have the projects and we have 1 repository, and that repository has the library. And we need to create now this one on the right side and reuse the same library. In order to do this, in order to achieve that, we have to separate that library. And when I mean separate it, I do not mean to separate the source code itself, but the artifact, the buildable artifact, to separate it. And we have some options to do this. Some options in terms of tools. We can do this either by using Artifactory, either using Nexus, either using Verdaccio, or, of course, we can use NPM. And for this talk, we will go with Verdaccio. We will see how to install Verdaccio, how to publish to Verdaccio, and how to reuse it in multiple applications. In order to understand how how to achieve this, let's first see how things work. Let's say that we have an Angular application. And before I start explaining all of this flow, we need to think the Verdaccio that this is a proxy that sits between the application and the NPM. And it sits between these two. And now let's say that we have an Angular application, and this Angular application has an NPM package. We execute our command, and the command is npm install something. And then this command goes to the proxy, and the proxy does this question. Does this command belong to my side or belongs to npm? It belongs to npm, so go there, resolve it, and return it back. And how about now if we have a private package? Again, the flow goes like this. We'll go to the proxy, which is our Verdaccio, and the Verdaccio does the same thing, the same question. Does this package belongs to my database, or does this belong, for example, to an npm? It belongs to my database, so I will resolve it from my own file system or whatever. And now we have the question, how can we use a proxy? To learn how to use a proxy, we first have to learn what is a registry. So a registry is just a repository for packages that implement this specification, CommonJS package registry specification. This is the specification that has been implemented by npm, and this is the specification that has also implemented by Verdaccio. If you run this command into your terminal, npm config with a grep, for example, registry, you will see here that you have this variable, registry. And then it has https registry.npmjs.org, which is the URL of the npm itself. But the good thing with this is that the registry itself is just a variable. So since this is a variable, we can change the variable. And we have some options. One option is to use environment variables, or to use terminal variables, or to use the file .npmrc, which is the configuration for the npm. And this is what we're going to do. This is the file that we're going to use. And now we will switch to the poly repo and to see how things work. Again, into a live code. And the steps that we will follow are the following. First, install Verdaccio, and then deploy a library, and then use the library. A note here about Verdaccio, and the reason that I use Verdaccio is that it's open source, it's free, and easy to use. So let's now switch again. Let me close everything. Close this as well. Close this, kill this, and open just the terminal. So the command is, let me zoom in a bit, npm install Verdaccio with a global flag. I'm not going to execute this now because I have already done this. And the next step, as soon as we install Verdaccio, is to run Verdaccio. The very first step that we see here is that we have this YAML file, which is a huge one, so let me show you. If I do here just a cut, it has many things, which is good and bad. The good thing is that it's configurable a lot, and we can do many things. The other thing that we see here is that we have this kind of URL. So let's open the browser and go and see what we have just installed for 873. So this is how the Verdaccio looks like at the very first time. So let me guide you a bit through what we're seeing. It's not that hard. So at the header, we can see that we have search packages, just the logo, and then here we have the small menu, and then it guides us how to publish our first library. And at first it says npm add user using the registry. This is very important. And then we have to publish and then just refresh the page. So let's follow these kind of rules. I will copy this and I will add just npm add user with this registry. And my username is going to be Profanis, I don't know, user A, whatever, and a very strict password, 12345, and this is going to be my email. So it seems that we are already logged in. And the next step, it says that you have now to publish. Okay, so let's go into our library that we have already created here. and let's do the following. I will build my library, ng-build the profanus lib, and then let's go to the dist directory into the profanus lib, and we'll have to publish it. If you do not remember the command to publish, it's easy to go here, npm publish, copy the registry, and just paste it here. And it seems that the very first version, the very first patch version of our library has been published. And now if we go to Verdaccio and refresh the page, we can see that we have it here, which it seems like having an npm. And if we click here, we can see that we have the readme file, which is this thing. And on the right side, we have a short description of the readme, and then we have some options of how to install it. So this is the second step. And it seems that we have already managed to install the Verdaccio and deploy also a library. And how about now use the library? We have to create a consumer. So previously we created an application, and I'm going now to create another one. So let me go here, libtalk. And I'm going to just do an ng-new, and the name will be profanus up2. No routing, just the CSS, personal preference, no more than that. So this application is going to be the consumer. And since we're talking about consumer, this is the guy that needs to have also the configuration for the npm, the .npmrc file. So let's give it some time. Okay, so let's now jump into this application and just have the code. And inside here, into the root, I will create a new file. And this is going to be my npm.rc file. And I will provide my registry equals my HTTP localhost into the port 4873. This means that from now on, this application, whenever executes any command for npm, it will go directly to the registry, to the Verdaccio registry. And how can we install now the library? By this command, npm install profanus lib. So copy to clipboard, let's go back, and I will just paste it here. Now, what we expect to see is into the packagization to have this guy, profanus lib, which says that this is the version that we have. And let me also show you the package log. I will scroll down a bit, just a random one. As you can see, this package has been resolved by https registry npm.js.org, which is the default registry for npm. However, if we search for profanus lib, this has been resolved from localhost 4873, which is our local one. So since now we have the library here, we can start using it. If you remember in the previous setup, where we had the monorepo, we had into the tsconfig a path alias. You know what, let's do the same thing here as well. I will create a path alias, and the name will be profanus lib, exact same like the monorepo. And this time we do not have the dist directory. This time we have to resolve the library from the node modules. So my path, here will be node modules / profanus lib. So this means that from now on we can reference that alias to use the library. So let's do this. Into the source app module, I will go into the imports array and I will do the following. I want to import my profanus lib module from this alias. Nice. So let's now go into the app component HTML and try to use this. Try to use the selector. And of course I have something ready here, which is this one. Lib profanus lib, and then I'm providing just the title and the subtitle. So let's give it a try. What will happen if I do an ng-serve? And yes. Yeah, we have a compilation error. And we have the compilation error, and the reason is that our library has a dependency on material, but this application has no dependency to material. So we have here two options. The first option is to directly go into this application and add Angular material. And the second option, which I think is a better approach, is to go to the library itself and define the peer dependencies. And the peer dependencies means that the consumer of this library, my peer, should have this kind of dependencies. Where is this? Here. So here we already have by default this kind of peer dependencies, and we need also to add here the Angular material and the CDK. So let me scroll down into the monorepo application, and I have to locate the Angular CDK and the Angular material, and I will copy both of them. And I will go here, and I will just paste them. Now, the options that we have to do is we have first to build the application, and then we have to publish. And this is the reason that I increased the version, because we cannot publish the same version. So let me go 2 steps back, and I want to build this library. And then let's go to this profiles lib, and then I have to publish. npm publish, in which registry? This one. So let's see. Nice. So now it seems that we have just published this version, the patch version 2. And if we go to Verdaccio, we can see it even here. This is 1, but if I reload, we expect now to see the number 2, which seems that it worked. And now let's install again the profiles lib, but this time the latest version. We expect this time into the package.json to have the latest one. Let's see. Now we have a small delay, and the reason that we have a delay, if we see this terminal, it tries to resolve all of the packages from the npm. I think it's close enough. Okay, so now we have the second version. And let's now try to serve. Any guess what will happen? I think it's obvious now what will happen, because we already see that it resolved all the material dependencies. And the reason is that from npm version 7 onwards, what they have done is that if we have peer dependencies and this kind of dependencies are not yet in my application, the npm will download it for us. So now, if we go into the localhost, into this port, we see that it seems to work just fine. But again, we do not see any theme here. And the reason is that, yeah, we installed the Angular material, but we didn't reference the theme of that Angular material into our application. So again, the same flow. How can we do this? Either manually or using the schematic. And I will prefer to go with the schematic. ng-add Angular/material. Yeah, this is the one. Let's pick, for example, pink, blue, gray. Yes, here, include animations. And let's now try to serve again. And now we expect everything to work as expected. And this is it. So we managed to create our library and publish it in a monorepo and use it in a separate application. So what's happening in general with the libraries is that we try to create, despite if they have material or not, they do not have their own theme. It could be, we could have some styled components, but this is not always the case. Sometimes it's much preferable to have like a specific theme into your application. So having this, it seems that we managed to install Verdaccio, we deploy the library, and then we use the library into our consumer using the .npmrc. And the last things, and I will close with this one, the last things, and this is more for your side, it's how about auth protection? Because we discussed about the Verdaccio and why do we need in our company, in our organization to have Verdaccio, something like that. Perhaps we need to have an isolated library for specific users. And for that one, we need also to have an auth protection. And Verdaccio has some plugins that support this idea, and it's not that hard to do this. And how about the theming? Don't we need also to have a specific theme that looks like in our brand color? And last but not least, of course, how to deploy to a remote server. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
So I am Ruby on Rails developer, and in our project we use maybe the same behavior with Ruby gems. And gem in general it's npm package. How do you solve issue when you should have production and, for example, development?
Yeah, this is a very good one. So in Angular, what we use mainly the npm link. So you have the library, and then you link it, and which creates a symlink, and then you have to use it into your application. This is what you ask, right? Or for environments, you mean production and...
Yeah. So, for example, you have 002 version, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
You created, but in production you should use 001.
Yeah.
So you, according to your dependency package JSON, you just switch between different versions, and in node modules you have different versions.
Yeah.
And so how we have, like in our project, when we update something, yeah, we have a new version, we push it on GitHub, and this version is related to the current development branch. But production branch uses the old
one.
And we need continuously to update package JSON. So you have the same case, the same issue, or you solve it some another way.
No, it's exactly the same issue, and actually, to be honest with you, I do not see like an issue here, and I think this is a right approach, meaning that you have the developer and you have the version 1, despite if you have version 2 or version 3 into your Verdaccio or whatever, and you tested it out. Are you happy? No. Then perhaps you have to do some changes. Are you happy now with these kind of changes? Yes. It's time to deploy it to the production server. And yeah, how to deploy it? Of course, increase the packaging and stuff like that, which is, this is the flow that we're following as well.
Okay. For example, if you have a big team and it works on the same library, and one developer increased the version and set, for example, 003, and another one set 003, because he did not know about this version is already set. We have totally the same issue, you know, we have team, and at the same time we just decided do not use versions, and right now we just use GitHub hash.
Okay.
Because versions is not working. When you
in this kind of cases, yeah, it will be.
When you develop it's really fast, you know, when a lot of commits happens and it's big library and it's used everywhere, you know, it grows, and in one period of time we just decide that we do not use version because it's not working. That's easy, but just use hash commit and it works.
Yeah, it works. At the same time, you know what? I mean, I'm thinking that either we have to change the way that we are approaching the versions, or we have to approach, to follow a different approach in terms of how we increase the versions and who is responsible to increase these kind of versions. So I would go even a step behind. So if, for example, a developer A increases to 3 and the developer B increases to 3 as well, of course he cannot deploy it. He will have some issues, definitely. And then you have to rebase, take the latest changes and redeploy. And I'm not sure in this case how the GitHub versions in terms of rebasing solves the problem. So perhaps it solves, yeah. It solves one part of the problem in terms of versioning, but the other problem remains. So I would go one step behind and just reiterate through the process, the complete process of who is responsible to do this thing. But it's exactly the same thing.
It should be like, yeah, one person.
Can you repeat the question before answering?
Yeah, of course. Correct.
It should be someone to manage all this, yeah.
Sorry?
It
It should be someone to manage all.
Exactly, it should be someone to manage. So just to repeat again the question in case someone didn't answer. So the question was, how about if we have a big team and that big team wants to increase the version, and we have multiple developers that want to increase into the same version. For example, the latest one is the patch version 2, and then the developer A and the developer B at the same time wants to increase the version to 3. And how can we solve these kind of issues? So that was the question and the discussion that we had previously. Thanks for the question.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, firstly.
Thank you.
You mentioned about peer dependencies. So what I understood is like a mechanism which somehow enforces some libraries that your library was dependent on to be installed in the application where you use the library. So let's say I have other library which I own. I mean, I created this library, and I wanted this library, let's call it library B, to be somehow included in the build of library A, that, let's say, parent library. Is it somehow possible to make it included in the build of the library A?
So let me repeat the question and at the same time to understand what is the flow. So you're saying that you have library A and it has the package whatever, and then you have library B which has a dependency to library A which has the package whatever, and then you want to use the library B into your application.
Exactly. With no need to, establish the peer dependency, which makes me like enforced to install the library B as well in the application, in the
this is possible because with the peer dependencies, the consumer of this one will all the dependencies will be automatically installed for you. So this is one good thing. The other thing with the peer dependency is that how about if your application has already another version? So then you have to resolve this kind of conflicts. So NPM will return will respond back that you have already this kind of version, and it's something like good luck, resolve it. So this is the problem. But yeah, this is manageable. Very good question. Yeah, please.
So, if we use a proxy server, will that mess up with our, if different developers have different versions of the same software, will that mess up with the CEO search results or no?
I'm trying to understand the question. So you have the proxy, and we have a certain package into a certain version.
Yes, like different developers maybe will not update their JS or something else, and then will that mess up with the CEO numbers? Because like Angular or other JS programs, they're just like, if we go into the browser and we turn off the JS, then we are left with HTML code.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like oftentimes it's hard for SEO results to be effective because first the HTML protocols are traffic, but one of the ways to overcome that problem is like a proxy server rendering, or like a pre-rendering, or like a dynamic rendering, or something of this sort. So if we have like a messy code in a proxy server, will that mess up with the CEO results?
Yeah, okay. No, I think that understands the question. So the question is, we need to have a friendly to the search engine's application, and we want our page to be SEO friendly in general, and whether having a proxy with a certain library, regardless of the versions, if this will affect it. In this case, it won't affect it. So one is not related to the other. So it's a completely different mechanism of how to have either an SSR, server-side rendering application, or a static one to make it SEO friendly. So this is one mechanism. And the other one is how to manage your own dependencies for your own organization. So it's they are two different things. And one won't affect the other. Yes, please.
I have a question that might sound like a basic one, but because we mentioned there are two ways to pretty much compose your applications, and you can use a poly repository or you can use a mono repository. And if I understand it correctly, those are two separate ways, right? You either use one or the other.
Yes.
In your opinion, because I've just started using an X as well in organizing my workflow, but what is a better way to, which of those two ways are better in order to, in situations where you need to think about the dependencies and the conflicts between the repositories or the libraries that you're using, and what are the key points, like the pluses, the cons, pros and cons in using one or the other?
Yeah, very good question. So the question is comparing monorepo and polyrepo and whether to use one or the other. What is better than the other? So I would say that my personal opinion is that I will go with a monorepo, and having a monorepo, it makes it easier in terms of managing the dependencies of your application without having much of problems. On the other side, however, there are certain cases or products or organizations for a number of reasons they want to go into a polyrepo. So in this case, of course, we need to have these kind of tools. But if I have to choose one or the other, I would go with a monorepo. I think this makes it easier even on the CI level. So having a polyrepo makes it even harder on the CI. So monorepo, it's somehow easier to manage it and run everything for your application, especially if you have also end-to-end tests. So you have your application, and your application, one interconnects somehow with the other. You can open all of them together somehow and have a very complex workflow with your end-to-end tests as well. So yeah, I would go with a monorepo. And the reason, so here is the question, and why do we need also to know this kind of tools? Why polyrepo then? Why Verdaccio? Give me a sec just to finish this one. So the reason is that we need to have in our tool set, if you like, we need to have in our tool set this kind of solutions of how to solve different problems.
Yeah, so very similar question, I guess, for someone from the chat that I will ask you. So whether you have in mind some good candidates, good project within which we should go with Verdaccio and follow repos.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, so whether you have in mind some good project candidates, some good project examples where we should go with Verdaccio and follow repos.
Like an open source?
Yeah, that's the open question. What kind of the projects, or in which, in your opinion, we should go with this approach?
Okay, I see. So let's say I will share a personal experience. So the question is the following. So where can I use Verdaccio? Where can I use a polyrepo, right? So a personal experience is that I used to work in a company and they had something like an allergy in a monorepo. They didn't want to listen to monorepo. They wanted to have polyrepo. They were very strong into that one. And we wanted also to have the same UI library, the same UI components library, nothing to do with material, nothing to do with any other component library, a custom one. So we built our own custom library, UI library, and we wanted the same one to be used from different applications. So how can we achieve using this one? An option is, of course, to have to deploy it in a proxy. So this is one very good candidate for the UI libraries. I'm not sure if you have any other question. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Panis, for the great presentation. I think people really enjoy it. So now I'm inviting you for a short break, and yeah, I'm inviting you for a short break, and we'll back after 10 minutes break to see Mateusz's presentation about testing component harness. Also should be really enjoyable. So yeah, let's have a break, and we see each other in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome after break. Right now we'll have a speech from Mateusz Stefańczyk. He will talk about component harnesses testing, or maybe testing with component harnesses. So I think you already seen Mateusz in our previous meetups, so I can only say that he's really great person. He's also very humble. Mateusz, all the best, and I give the voice for you, and good luck.
Thank you. So, as already Grzegorz said, I am Mateusz Stefańczyk, and I am one of the Angular team leader in the House of Angular, and today I'm gonna talk about the testing with component harnesses. So maybe at the beginning I will ask how many of you have been using the component harnesses already within your projects. Okay, so only one person. So we'll have a good occasion to listen why, from my perspective, it's just a good solution to go for. So let's start with agenda. We will discuss what are the component harnesses, what are the benefits of using the component harnesses. I will go through the building block of the harnesses from the perspective of the author, but also from the perspective of the consumer, because we don't have to always be the author of the harnesses. Library we use might deliver it. And I will show you a very short example of the checkbox component harnesses, which I created by myself on the Stack Blitz. So we are briefly go through that one. Okay, so what are the component harnesses? If you would like to say it in the one sentence, we would say that the component harness is a class that lets a test interact with the component via supported API. So this API interacts with our components exactly same way as the user will interact with it. What's more, it's provide us with the isolation from the component implementation details. So when we communicate through this API, we are no more depends on the components implementation details, which I will explain a little bit deeper soon. And component harness pattern is based on the page object pattern, which is commonly used within integration testing. So those of you who maybe know the page object pattern may notice some similarities across of my presentation. Let's take a look how it will look graphically. So there is a first case. Let's say we have app component, in scope of which we have the select component, and selecting this some kind of the option in scope of this select will affect our app component. But let's focus on this small unit like select component and interaction of that one. I prepare some steps which we'll for sure have to take in scope of our test case to manipulate that select component. So first of all, we'll have to select element inside of child component view. If we want to find it, we have to provide some query or selector by which we'll be looking for that one. Then we have to trigger on it some click event to open it. Then we have to find in scope of the open select options of that select, and again trigger the select option in scope of these options to somehow select something within that component. And as we can see, there is really a lot of secondary work first, so which we will have to repeat within each test case, which will be using this select component. So it's most common interaction, and this interaction we will have to repeat within each of our test case. What's more, as I said, we depend at some implementation details, so we can imagine what will happen when we have been selecting this select element based on the class or something. So whether author of this component change the class name, each of our components test will already breaks because there is no such a class in scope of the select component. So let's take a look at the second scenario when our test case interact only with the API which provide us component harness, and we no more care how he opens the select. We just call the method of the harness within our test case, open the select. But we are no more interested what is the class of this select, how to find this select, whether this select is, I don't know, within a view or maybe it's disabled and something will not work, or how to select nth option. We are not interested with to look throughout the options, whether this option is already opened, and to click on them. This entire responsibility is moved to the component harness, and the author of the harness is responsible for handling the common behavior of its component. We are only triggering the options which are somehow representing the behavior of component. So right now there is no couple dependencies on any kind of the selector, classes, attributes, nothing. Everything is in scope of the component harness. Okay, so what are the benefits from those which we already have mentioned? For sure is reusability. So we use same logic across all of our components. We no more care about the finding elements, clicking over the elements. Everything is close in scope of the harness and happens there. Readability. So the harness methods are pretty well described. So as you saw, it was like open select. You don't have to think why he is just doing the document query, select, and click over this, what he find by this, querying this document, and so on. The readability is great. And refactor freedom. It's especially from the perspective of author. If he decide to just rename class of his elements, if he decide to remove the div, which he thinks is no more needed, he can do this and be safe that for sure he will not break other people's tests, because they depends on the harness, and if harness, as long as it have to just follow the same behavior, provide the same behavior of my component, I am safe, because no one should depend on my elements, no one should depend on my classes, they should depend at my harness and communicate with my component throughout this harness. Okay, so I distinguish 3 building blocks of the harnesses when we want to create it or just consume it. The first one is component harness class. It's the base abstract class, which each component harness have to extend. It's provide us with below set of the methods, which are responsible for dedicated to finding the elements, but in scope of the component DOM, what is important. But what's more, we can see there that these methods do not directly find the elements, they return as the functions which finds the elements. And why is this approach chosen there? This approach safeguards us against caching references. So if we use, for example, ngIf, and it once hides and shows the element, in this case, it's completely new DOM structure. And using the functions, we ensure that we are always operating at the current DOM state, so that we don't have some cache reference to the element which no more exists within a DOM. Yeah? I can briefly go through these functions, but as I said, they are mostly dedicated to find the element in scope of the component DOM. The differences between them is just the purpose and expected result. So in case of the locator for, it will return the promise with the test element, or will reject the promise. Locator for optional will do exactly the same, but in case of the not finding the element, it will return as the null. And locator for all will look for the collection of the elements and will behave exactly same as a locator for. Host returns the instance of our component. And this test element, okay, first we'll go through a small example. I forgot about this one. So as you can see, there is also a static property host selector, which each of the component harness who extend the component harness class have to implement. And this host selector, I have defined it at the very top, is responsible for identifying the component harness with the component which is used within DOM. Yeah, so in most cases, about within 100% cases, this host selector should be exactly same as a selector of corresponding component on directive to which this harness is dedicated. And below, as you can see, I just use this locator for, and I am looking for the item who has the attribute data test equal my selector, which is hoa-checkbox --input. So I even write it there, what kind of the attribute this input should have and what kind of the attribute I'm looking for. So I'm looking for the input with even not the input, looking for element with that attribute. And in scope of the protected input, I have the function which will return this element in scope of the promise, or will reject the promise if it will not find the element. So the next building block are the test elements. So as I mentioned, test elements are returned by the locator functions, and test elements are, it's the design abstraction, which is designed this way. It should work across the different environments, not only the Karma and unit tested, but also in scope of the Selenium environment and so on. It depends on the implementation of that abstraction. What's more, we never should interact with our DOM elements different way than throughout the test elements. We shouldn't make in scope of the harnesses something like document query or something, because this harness might not work in the different environments. And another best practice in scope of the test element, we should never expose them throughout our harnesses. So that I had the input example, we should never expose it to the user throughout our harnesses. What we should do instead, we should provide our user, our consumer, with an actions, more narrow functions, which focus at the behavior of our component or the state of our component we would like to share to our consumer. So in this case, I am using created the function isDisabled, which first, as using the await, reads the input element and then checks at this element whether it have the property disabled. And this also return the promise, and then I just evaluate this promise using await disabled. Here the function from Angular to just narrow some types to the Boolean. And that's it. So for, let's say, my example, I just not exposing the input and let the user to check by himself whether my component is disabled. If I know that my component could be in disabled state, I would rather expose the method which provide him with the information regarding the state of my component, so whether it's disabled, yeah, instead of letting him to just use this input and check it by itself. Okay, and another building blocks, and the last one I would say, is testbed harness environment. It's just environment we use to load our harnesses. In this case, it's testbed harness environment, but it might be also Selenium harness environment and so on. And this class provides us with the set of the methods dedicated to initialize the loader for loading harnesses. And these loaders can have the different scope, how far they should look for these harnesses. And loader is looking in scope of our fixture, for example, but document root loader, we will look for the harness, matching harness, which will match the provided component throughout the entire HTML, entire rooted HTML. So in case when we will have to initialize or load the harness of dialog, which is rooted at the very bottom of our entire view, we will rather need to use the document root loader instead of the loader who will search only in scope of the tested component, because we have to go far beyond our component. Okay, and testbed harness usage is pretty simple. Mostly it's in scope of before each function, or the function which is run before each of the tests, because in my scenario, I create such a before each by myself and test it in scope of each it instead of doing it in this way. And we can see there we are initializing our loader using testbed harness environment loader and providing our fixture, which in this scenario is my app component. Yeah, so this loader will look for the components and harnesses only in scope of that fixture. Okay, and right now I will move to my code, which is on the StackBlitz. So small refactor there. Okay, and I have it. So let me know whether you can see it or not. Okay, already made some changes. So I will first start with app component. It's pretty simple component. It just have a few HOA checkboxes on the view, and especially nothing special. And we have the app component specs, which is also nothing fancy. I will just for the while comment this test because that's one which breaks. We can see the pretty classical setup of the test environment and my test setup. As I said, I use the test setup, which I trigger in scope of each it. And I do it because when I am using the test setup function, I can provide it with some kind of the options with which I would like to initialize my test environment. If I will have there before each, I will not be able to provide some initial values when running testbed configuration. So I mostly use it to provide the state of the component instance. Okay, and we'll take a look at my HOA checkbox component. It's very simple component. It contains just 3 inputs regarding whether it's disabled, whether it's checked, and whether it's indeterminate. And it looks like that. So nothing fancy. And right now, take a look at my harness. So it's same harness we have been already seeing during the presentation. So I have my selector, it's HOA checkbox. So as I said, it's exactly same as the selector of my component. What's more, I have the locator for my input, which in my case is the checkbox. This input should have the attribute data test equal HOA checkbox. In this case, it's underscore. I will show you then why. Input. And you can see that I have set this attribute on my input. And also in case I have it in my label, but in this case it's different nomenclature. So data test attributes are data HTML attributes. You can set after the data dash whatever you want. Cypress would recommend you to use data dash CI. We use data test because we want to have the single selector for all the test environments we use. Yeah, so we test in scope of the unit test. We use data test, and it's not somehow correlated with the test environment or test tool like data CI, which strictly says data Cypress or something like that. What's more, there is a possibility to, during build in scope of your Webpack, implement some kind of the function which will remove that attributes completely from your build. So you don't have to be afraid that your build size will increase due to adding such attributes. Okay, and what's more I have in scope of my function, I have the isDisabled function, which I showed you already. I have isIndeterminate. It's very similar, so I'm just getting the property and validating whether it's indeterminate. I can validate whether it's checked exactly same way. If I would like to, I could just provide the function which will just click over this element, and I could name it like, I don't know, click or select, but it will be more like click because when clicking we can just change the state from enable. Okay. There is some problem with the stack blitz sometimes. Okay, so that's it. Let's go to the tests right now. So I make a small comparison, but this test, due to some stack blitz related reason, may fail, but let's take a look only. So what we have there is like the classical way we would go with our test. So first we will instantiate our fixture. It's instantiated in scope of the test setup function, so we are fine then. And there we are using query selector to find us an input. So we already have this couply dependency at the implementation details of my checkbox component because you are depending on my data test attribute, and I already see why it breaks because I changed the input attribute. So let's bring it back. So this is how it will look normally. So you will first find some element using query selector, using some kind of the selector you would like to. Probably you will open the developers tools and look what kind you attach to. And then using this instance, you will check the attributes. So something very similar I have already done in scope of the harness. In the comparison to the harnesses, you will just use the loader, which I already showed you, is instantiated in scope of my test setup function. And get harness, use method get harness and provide the class hoa checkbox harness. And then you will use only checkbox harness and is disabled and validate whether it's true or not. I just provide it with the disabled true, so we can assume it's true and our test pass. If I will change it for the false, it should break. Yeah, we can see that one of the tests has just break. Okay, so let's say you're just using some external library. It might be the Angular material and you used my math checkbox and they decided, or Hoa material library, and we decided to change the attributes. We don't want anymore the underscores, or we don't want anymore some class. So what we will have done, we will go to our component. We'll check the data test to something like that. Of course, we will update our harnesses that every consumer of our library will be safe. And what happens right now? So one test is failing. So let's take a look. And the test which is failing is this one, which had the coupling for some internal dependencies of my library. Yeah? And doesn't matter whether it will be data test, whether it will be some div, which we decide to remove, or whether it will be some kind of the class we decide to rename or just completely get rid of it because we found it's not valuable anymore. Your tests, all of your tests will break. So that's one of the huge benefits of the harnesses. You may ask me, okay, so what when I want to have the 3 checkboxes across of my page and I would like to use loader only for this one dedicated. So in scope of the harnesses, we can define the with static function, which will accept the base harness filters. And this is some kind of thing like the options. And in scope of that options, we can define what should be selector of the component our harness should operate on. So let's take a look. When I have the, let's say, checked true, and I have something like checked false. Okay, so let's do, okay, let's make it false for the while. Let's rename that it will not fail anymore. Okay, and here we have like should be checked, and let's define with selector. And we can provide there the selector. What is the selector of that one? Okay, it's data test, something like that. Okay, I need to make it different. So, and remove that one. And let's refresh it. And you can see it's failed, yeah, because I said it should be true, but this exactly component, which I would like to validate with my harness, is false, have the checked false. So if I check it to be falsy, everything should work. Yeah, so that's it from my side. I hopefully was able to provide you with all kind of the benefits I see within using the harnesses and just other people see who recommends it. What I can say that also the Angular material provides us with the harnesses for each of them components. So whoever of you is using the Angular material, you can start using them component harnesses and just be safe. So that's it. Thank you. I don't know whether there are some questions.
harness for their own component, right?
Yeah.
And so in a large code base, it may happen that various developers choose different names for functions. As you presented, some people will say click, other people will say select, other people will say choose. What do you think is the best way to maintain consistency across harnesses in the project?
Yeah, so I would say it's same way as you will, provide some consistency in naming the properties, whether you will choose the camel case or some other case. There is no golden rule. So what you can do, for example, I can think of maybe some kind of the ESLint rule you can create by yourself or something which will evaluate it. It's maybe pretty big effort, but I think it's achievable. But if not, you have to learn each other, you have to agree each other for some standards and keep them and execute them throughout the code review and so on. That's how we learn each other and provide the standards. Yeah, but if you would like something really to happen automatically, I would say maybe some ESLint rule or something.
I have a different question.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have a harness for a component that is composed of smaller components that also have harnesses. For example, let's say your component has 3 checkboxes, all of them are math checkboxes. Would you rather expose the harnesses of subcomponents or write a method, like a wrapper method that hides the inner harnesses from the user of the larger external harness?
Mm-hmm. So because right now I have to repeat the question, I forgot about the first one. So the question is whether in case in which we have some bigger, more complex component, which in scope of itself has some other smaller components, and each of them have the harnesses, and this big one as well have the harnesses, whether I would expose the smaller component harnesses or will test them separately, or how I will handle this case. So that's something we even have been discussing today, how to handle the bigger, more I have to say complex component, and it honestly depends what kind of these components, these small components are, because if are some kind of the inputs, they can have them own, let's say, harnesses, and they can be tested separately by themselves. But when we are just testing bigger behavior of that component, I will just use these harnesses or extend these harnesses. It depends how we will just handle that one in scope of this one big harness dedicated for this one big component. If they are really strongly coupled and so on, yeah, and that I cannot live or exist or provide the value this component is dedicated to without those components, without interacting with those components, yeah. So I would rather if you would like to achieve some behavior from this one big component, which you are looking to, and you would like to test it, but in the meantime, there are required 5 small steps from these small components, I would rather hide them in scope of this one function in this bigger component, yeah, to do not force user to know what to happen to just select this card or do something with that card, if you know what I mean, yeah.
So you're basically saying if there is a mutation that you want to achieve,
yeah,
which is of several steps, then it's better to.
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah. Okay, so if there is no question, you are fine. Thank you for being with us there.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mateusz. Okay, so that's the for the streaming guests. That's the end of our streaming today, and for the guests that are on site, we have a questionnaire for you, and you have a QR code on your desk, and I encourage you to fill out the questionnaire about the meetup, and then we can select one of you to get a prize with the gadgets, with some swag, but also people that are, how to say, joining the Kahoot. And so there's small contest as always. Natalia will present Kahoot here and you can answer questions from the presentations to the best answers, and the fastest answers will get you a prize as well. But yeah, for now, thank you, Matt, for...
But also I remind myself about one of the component, which might be a good example. In our code base, it's autocomplete, where we have the select, input, and so on. But when we are just testing this autocomplete, we are not exposing these smaller harnesses. We just provide through the autocomplete harness this full set of the behavior he can have, let's say. Yeah, that's
Great.
it.
Thanks. Okay, so let's start with the Kahoot.